I became a Unitarian Universalist in the late 1980s when I signed the book at First Parish in Lexington. Soon after, I took their course for new UUs. One of the exercises we did was to go around the circle and tell our spiritual journey stories. I didn't realize it at the time, but I've been involved in teaching new UU several times since, and I've noticed that new UU spiritual journey stories tend to follow a formula. You were born into some other religion, or maybe no religion. At some point, usually during your teen years, you became dissatisfied with that path, so you began to explore. You tried this, you tried that, and just about the time you decided that this whole religion spirituality thing wasn't for you, you wandered into a Unitarian Universalist church. And then you had a homecoming moment. Something made you realize that this is where you belong. So now you're going to live as a UU happily ever after. My story fit the formula. I grew up in a very conservative Lutheran sect that believed the Bible was literally true in every particular. Adam and Eve were real people who lived about 6,000 years ago. Every land animal in the world is descended from the creatures on Noah's Ark, and so on. I got disillusioned with that as a teenager, and for several years, I didn't think about religion much, at least not in any positive way. But sometime in my 20s, I became fascinated by religious experiences, and I began to seek them out in Buddhist meditation, in neo-pagan ritual, and in the Western mystery tradition. In my early 30s, I wandered into First Parish Lexington and had my homecoming moment. The first reading in the first service I attended was from Bertrand Russell. There's a reason that had an impact on me. In the church where I grew up, every reading came either from the Bible or from another Lutheran. Billions and billions of people had lived and died over the years, but we had closed ourselves off from almost all of them. What that reading from a secular philosopher symbolized to me was that to the extent UUs are able to grasp it and learn from it, the wisdom of the world belongs to us. Nothing is out of bounds. So we read from philosophers and novelists, from the Tao Te Ching, the Mahabharata, the Quran, and yes, even from the Bible and from Lutherans. This was where I belonged. Much, much later, though, I realized that the final piece of the formula, the happily ever after part, is problematic, and this realization relates to another aspect of the church where I grew up. We recited the Apostles' Creed every Sunday. Some of you probably know that creed, and I'm not going to go through it now, but let's just agree that there's some questionable stuff in there. The point of reciting it every week was to send a message. If you can't recite this creed in good conscience, then you don't belong here. To me, that had a chilling effect on any kind of deep thinking, because if you didn't police your thoughts very closely, you might discover that you didn't believe something in the creed, and then you'd have to leave the church. So one of the things I love most about Unitarian Universalism is that it's not that way. No matter what new ideas you explore or how many times you change your mind, you don't have to leave. You may decide you want to leave, but nobody's going to throw you out. Growing and changing doesn't have to mean losing your community. Now, growing and changing and living happily ever after aren't directly contradictory, but there is a tension between them. Happily ever after implies that you've reached a destination, but growing and changing says the journey continues. So how do they fit together? Another class I've been involved in several times is coming of age. And a point I always make to the coming of age students is that Unitarian Universalism has a very non-fundamentalist view of its history. We honor and respect ancestors like William Ellery Channing and Hosea Ballou, but we also disagree with them. They were great thinkers of their day, but we live in a different day. So I've told UU teens that if they get to be my age and they're still teaching exactly the same things we taught them, that would be disappointing. Their goal shouldn't be to preserve our great wisdom, but to improve on what we taught them. The best Unitarian Universalists among them would be the ones who found our mistakes and fixed them, or applied UU principles to situations we had never thought about. So my ideal is not just that I should grow and change, but that Unitarian Universalism should grow and change too. At least that's the theory. So how's that working out? One of my favorite parts of Fiddler on the Roof comes after Tevye and Golda have gone to a great deal of trouble to get the village to accept that their daughter is going to marry the poor man she loves rather than the much better off man Tevye had promised her to. Now that all the excitement is over, Tevye starts musing more broadly about love. He and Golda had an arranged marriage. Before the wedding, they'd barely met, but their parents said they'd learned to love each other. And so now he's wondering, did it happen? He and Golda sing a very sweet song called Do You Love Me? And conclude that even though at this point they're stuck with each other and it doesn't make any practical difference, they actually do love each other. So now I want to raise kind of a similar question. While I was living happily as a UU, I was supposed to grow and change. Unitarian Universalism was supposed to grow and change around me. It's been more than 30 years now. Did it happen? Like Tevye and Golda, I want to claim that it did happen, and there are a couple of ways I could go from here. One would be to talk about privilege and structural injustice. 30 years ago, I was mostly unaware of how much advantage I got from being white and male, and thought that if I didn't consciously do anything to promote racism or sexism, that was about all anyone could expect from me. I think a lot of UUs felt that way then, and our institutional structures largely reflected that attitude. Obviously, quite a bit has changed, but I'm not going to go in that direction today. Partly because I've covered it in sermons at other churches, which you can find on my religious blog. I'll post some links. And partly because I think that topic is being widely discussed already. See, for example, the discussion of the proposed 8th principle at General Assembly. Instead, I want to talk about another major change, both in myself and in how I perceive the UU movement, a change that I don't think has been articulated quite so well. So I'd like to take a shot at it this morning, the way we interpret the 4th principle. The 4th principle is a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. 30 years ago, the emphasis was almost entirely on the word free. UUs have no pope, no creed, and no infallible holy book. No external force or authority constrains what you can believe or express. Even the principles themselves are just commitments made by the congregations. You, as an individual, are not bound by them. People who had been to div school usually objected if you said that UUs could believe anything you want, but most of us said it anyway. I mean, don't talk to me about the Trinity or the virgin birth or original sin, because I don't have to believe any of that stuff. I'm a UU. I can believe whatever I want. Sometimes you change gradually, but then something happens that makes you realize it all at once. My all at once moment happened 11 years ago. I was at my mother's funeral. My parents had stayed with the denomination they raised me in, and we developed a don't ask, don't tell arrangement about religion. I'll bet a lot of you could relate to that. So I never showed them the articles I published in UU World. When I came back to my hometown, I usually preached at the small UU church there, but Dad only came to hear me once, and Mom never did. Before she died, Mom designed her own funeral service. She picked the hymns and the readings, chose the minister, and so on. So that service reflected a very traditionally Christian view of the afterlife. Mom wasn't really dead. Her soul had just moved on to a perfect place. And she wasn't permanently lost to us either, because since we were all good Christians, we would join her in that perfect place after we died. As you might imagine, I wasn't buying this. But as I so often did, and as I also imagine a lot of you have done in similar circumstances, I recognized that this event wasn't about me. So there was no point in making an issue of my doubts. So I sat there quietly, feeling isolated and alienated, because maybe I was the only person in the whole room who felt this way. And then I had a thought that almost made me laugh. I didn't laugh because I was at a funeral and it wasn't about me. But I thought, wait a minute, I'm the Unitarian Universalist in the room. I'm supposed to be able to believe anything I want. So this idea that death isn't real and we're all going to be together in a perfect place someday, who doesn't want to believe that? That's when it hit me, that in fact, I couldn't believe anything I wanted. My mom's perfect afterlife sounded great. I just couldn't believe it. What I came to see in that moment was that UUs can believe anything they want, has it exactly backwards. Precisely because I was a UU, nobody else could authorize this pleasant fantasy for me. As a UU, I am responsible for my own beliefs. That's the responsible part of the free and responsible search. Once I recognized that, I began to see how much of contemporary American religion is about dodging responsibility, about believing something because you want to, and then using a church to shield you from any unfortunate consequences. So if I'm not a UU and I want to oppose abortion, I don't have to take responsibility for the women who will die without one or for the children who will come into the world unwanted. All I have to do is find a church that opposes abortion and become a devout member. Then the consequences are God's responsibility, not mine. Same thing if I want to persecute gays and lesbians or Muslims or people of other races. I just need to find a church that will authorize that bigotry for me. Or suppose I want to preserve a system that makes me a have rather than a have not. Don't try to make me feel guilty about the struggles of poor people because it's not on me. I didn't do it. It's the church. It's the Bible. It's God. UUs don't get to do that. We're not free to be irresponsible about our beliefs. These last few years have hammered that point home because our democracy is suffering from a plague of people who quite literally believe whatever they want to believe. That's what conspiracy theories are all about. Do you want to believe that COVID is a hoax, that white people are the real victims of racism, that climate change isn't real, so we can burn all the fossil fuels we want, that your candidate really won the election, even though every count of the ballot says he lost? Go for it. Today, that's what it means to believe whatever you want. Being a UU, on the other hand, means that you can't believe something just because you want to. We are on a responsible search for truth and meaning. 30 years ago, I didn't understand the significance of that. Now I do. I want to sum up by doing one of the exercises we have our coming of age classes do, the elevator speech, the short, quick summary of what Unitarian Universalism is about. Whenever I've been involved with coming of age, I've tried to write an elevator speech, and I've never been happy with the result, until sometime last winter, when I wasn't teaching at all. That's when I came up with this one. Unitarian Universalists take responsibility for disciplining our own beliefs so that they are factual, reasonable, just, and kind. We will not stop trying to learn and grow and change until we have become the people the world needs.